I used to believe that if I poured enough love into my daughter, she'd eventually see it, feel it, and give a little back. I thought love could fix anything, even a heart that seemed to drift further away with every passing year. But I never imagined that Lillian, the girl I raised with every ounce of my soul, would secretly take out a massive life insurance policy on me and plan to stage my death as an accident during a fishing trip on Lake Michigan. My name is Margaret Hayes. I'm 55, a retired art teacher living alone in a $1.5 million condo just outside Chicago. My life has been quiet since I left the classroom, but it was always full of Lillian, her laughter, her dreams, her chaos. It all started with a phone call. Lillian's voice was shaky, almost too soft, like she was holding back tears. "Mom, I'm pregnant," she said. "Ethan and I are starting a marketing agency, but we're short on funds. Can you help? Just this once?" Lillian was 30 now, married to Ethan Brooks, a 32-year-old real estate agent with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I'd always supported her, through college, through her impulsive shopping sprees, through every mess she made. So I wired her $200,000, thinking it was for my future grandchild, for her future. I felt warm, like I was part of something bigger. The next day, I called to check in. Lillian picked up, her tone bright and distracted. "Hey, Mom, everything's great! Gotta run, though! Busy day!" I was about to say goodbye when I heard it, clear as day, before the call ended. Ethan's voice, low and smug. "She took the bait. The old lady sent the money," Lillian giggled, sharp and cold. "Good thing we faked that pregnancy. Worked like a charm." My heart stopped. The phone slipped in my hand, but I held it tight, as if letting go would make the words real. I stood frozen in my living room, the sunlight streaming through the windows, mocking me with its warmth. Every memory of Lillian, her tiny hand in mine, her crayon drawings pinned to my fridge, shattered like a mirror, leaving nothing but sharp, jagged edges. Lillian had always been reckless with money. When she was 22, she bought a sports car she couldn't afford, racking up $30,000 in debt. I paid it off, thinking she'd learn. A year later, she needed $15,000 for a business idea that never materialized. I gave it to her, telling myself she was young, she'd grow. But after she married Ethan, the calls for money didn't stop. They just got bigger. A new apartment, a wedding I paid for, vacations they deserved. I made excuses for her. She's busy, I thought. Marriage is hard. She'll come around. But that moment, hearing her laugh about faking a pregnancy, I saw the truth. I wasn't her mother in her eyes. I was a bank account, nothing more. I sat on the couch, staring at the wall where one of Lillian's old sketches still hung. A sloppy sunflower she'd drawn at 10, the edges yellowed with time. I'd kept it because it reminded me of the girl I thought she was. My hands trembled as I dialed her number again, hoping I'd misheard, that there was some explanation. No answer. I texted, "Love you, sweetheart. Just checking in." No reply. The silence was louder than any words she could have said. I felt like a fool, a woman who'd spent decades painting a picture of a family that didn't exist. I wasn't naive, though. I'd always held back a little, kept a safety net. But this time, I'd let my guard down completely, believing in a grandchild that was never real. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife, colder than the Chicago winter outside my window. I thought about every sacrifice. Nights spent grading papers to pay her tuition, weekends teaching her to paint, years of putting her first. And for what? To be a pawn in their game, a dollar sign with an expiration date. As I sat there, the weight of it all settled in my chest, heavy and unyielding. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, a strange clarity took hold. Lillian and Ethan thought they'd outsmarted me, but they didn't know the woman they were dealing with. I wasn't just a retired teacher with a soft heart. I was someone who'd survived loss, rebuilt herself, and learned to see through lies. If they wanted to play this game, I'd play too, and I'd make sure they regretted ever underestimating me. 3 days after that phone call, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I smoothed my sweater, took a deep breath, and opened the door. There stood Lillian, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, holding a cheap framed print of a sunset, the kind you'd find at a discount store. Ethan was beside her, his real estate agent grin plastered on, carrying a bottle of wine that looked more like a prop than a gift. "Mom," Lillian said, her voice syrupy sweet, "we just had to see you." She stepped forward, wrapping me in a hug that felt rehearsed, her perfume sharp and overpowering. Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning my condo's hardwood floors and high ceilings. "Been too long, Margaret. Thought we'd drop by." I forced a smile, my stomach twisting. After what I'd overheard, Lillian's cold laugh, Ethan's smug "she" took the bait. Their sudden warmth was as convincing as a bad painting. But I invited them in, playing the part of the doting mother. My condo, nestled in a quiet Chicago suburb, was worth $1.5 million, a fact I knew wasn't lost on them. Lillian had grown up here, her footsteps echoing in these halls, her laughter filling the rooms. She knew every inch of this place, and I could see the hunger in her eyes as she glanced at the skylight, the marble countertops. We sat in the living room and Lillian launched into her act. "Mom, I've been thinking about you so much," she said, her hand resting on mine, her nails perfectly manicured. "Remember when we used to paint together? I miss those days." Her words were soft, but they landed like a slap. She hadn't mentioned our painting sessions in years, not since she decided art was pointless and chased her marketing career. Ethan chimed in, his voice smooth. "You've got such a beautiful place here, Margaret. Must be a lot to manage. On your own." I sipped my coffee, watching them over the rim of my mug. Here it comes, I thought. Sure enough, Lillian leaned forward, her eyes wide with fake concern. "Ethan and I were talking, and our apartment's so cramped, especially with the baby coming. We were wondering, could we move in with you, just for a while?" Ethan nodded, picking up the thread. "And you know, since we'd be here, maybe it makes sense to put the condo in Lillian's name. Save you the hassle of taxes, maintenance, all that. You deserve to relax." My condo wasn't just a home. It was my sanctuary, paid for with years of teaching, saving, and careful planning. Lillian knew its value. She'd seen the appraisals, heard the neighbors talk. Her request wasn't about family, it was about ownership. I looked at them, their faces a perfect mask of care, and something inside me shifted. Once I would have agonized, torn between love and doubt, but not now. If they wanted to perform, I'd join the stage. "Of course," I said, my voice soft, almost too easy. "You can move in, and the condo. We'll figure it out." Lillian's eyes lit up, a flash of triumph she couldn't hide. Ethan's grin widened, his hand squeezing her knee. They thought they'd won, that I was the same trusting mother who'd bailed Lillian out of every bad decision. But I saw through their charade, and I was already painting a different picture in my mind, one where they'd learn exactly who they were dealing with. As they chattered about their plans for the condo, I nodded, my smile never wavering. Lillian hugged me again before they left, promising to move in soon. "You're the best, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with sweetness. I closed the door behind them, leaning against it, my heart heavy but my mind clear. They thought. They were pulling the strings, but I was about to cut them loose. This wasn't just my home they were after. It was my life, and I wasn't going to let them take either. The day Lillian and Ethan moved into my condo, the air in my home changed, like a storm cloud settling in. Boxes piled up in the hallway, their designer clothes and flashy gadgets spilling out, claiming space that used to feel like mine. Lillian, 30 and sharp as ever in her marketing world, strutted around like she already owned the place. Ethan, 32, with his real estate agent swagger, kept eyeing the walls, muttering about renovation potential. I watched them, my smile, practiced, my heart heavy with the truth I'd overheard. They'd taken out a life insurance policy on me, planning to cash in by staging my death as an accident. But I wasn't ready to confront them, not yet. I needed to see how far they'd go. It didn't take long for their masks to slip. Lillian started barking orders like I was her personal assistant. "Mom, make dinner, will you? I'm starving," she'd say, scrolling through her phone without looking up. One evening, I spent hours on a lasagna, hoping maybe, just maybe, we could share a moment like we used to. But when I set the plate in front of her, she pushed it away, wrinkling her nose. "This is bland. You used to be better at this." Then she tipped the plate, letting the food slide onto the floor. Ethan laughed, leaning back in his chair. "Come on, Margaret, you're rusty. Gotta step up your game." My cheeks burned, not from the insult, but from the casual cruelty in their eyes. I cleaned up the mess in silence, my hands steady, my mind racing. They treated me like I was invisible, except when they wanted something. Lillian would snap, "Mom, grab my laundry," or, "Why's the fridge empty?" Ethan would chime in, his tone patronizing. "You're retired, Margaret. You've got time to handle this stuff." I nodded, played along, but every demand chipped away at the love I'd once poured into Lillian. I kept thinking about the girl who'd sit with me at the kitchen table, her small hands gripping a paintbrush, giggling, as we created together. That girl was gone, or maybe she'd never existed. One night I couldn't sleep. The condo felt suffocating with their presence. I wandered to the living room where Lillian had left her phone on the coffee table, the screen still lit. I didn't mean to snoop, but a notification caught my eye, an email titled "Life Insurance Confirmation." My heart pounded as I opened it. There it was, a policy for $2.5 million, my name listed as the insured, Lillian and Ethan as beneficiaries. Another email buried in her inbox was worse. How to transfer property after an unexpected death. My hands shook, but I kept reading, each word a nail in the coffin of my trust. They weren't just after my condo, they wanted everything, and they were willing to erase me to get it. The final blow came a week later. I'd kept a collection of paintbrushes, some from my early teaching days, each one a memory of a student, a lesson, a moment when art felt like my purpose. They were stored in a wooden box in my studio, a sacred space. I came home one day to find the box gone. Lillian was lounging on the couch, sipping wine. "Where's my brush collection?" I asked, my voice tight. She shrugged, not even looking at me. "Oh, that old junk. I sold it online. Got a couple $100. You don't paint anymore, Mom, so what's the point?" My chest ached, like she'd ripped out a piece of my soul. Those brushes weren't just tools. They were my history, my heart. And she'd tossed them away like trash. That night, I stood in my bedroom, staring at the empty corner where the box used to sit. I heard Lillian and Ethan in the next room, their voices low but clear. "Once we get the condo, she can move to some cheap rental," Lillian said, her tone cold. Ethan chuckled. "Or a nursing home. She's getting old anyway." The words sank into me, heavy and final. I'd spent years making excuses for Lillian, her distance, her selfishness, believing she'd come back to me. But now I saw her for what she was, a stranger who saw me as a means to an end. I didn't cry. Instead, a fire sparked inside me, small but fierce. They thought I was weak, a pushover who'd hand over her life without a fight. But they didn't know me. Not really. I'd survived heartbreak before, rebuilt myself from nothing. If Lillian and Ethan wanted to play this game, I'd show them I could play better, and when I was done, they'd wish they'd never crossed me. I'd always been the kind of woman who believed in second chances, in the power of love to mend what was broken. But Lillian and Ethan had taken that belief and ground it into dust. They'd moved into my condo, treated me like a servant, sold my cherished paintbrushes, and worst of all, taken out a $2.5 million life insurance policy on me, planning to stage my death during a fishing trip on Lake Michigan. I could have confronted them, screamed, kicked them out, but that would have been too easy for them. Instead, I decided to paint a different kind of picture, one where they'd learn what it felt like to be outplayed. I started small, subtle, like an artist sketching the outlines of a masterpiece. I noticed how Lillian and Ethan loved their indulgent meals, greasy takeout, sugary desserts, anything rich and heavy. So I leaned into it. Every night I cooked dinners that seemed like treats but were designed to wear them down. Thick macaroni and cheese dripping with butter, bacon-laden sandwiches fried in oil, creamy mushroom soup so rich it clung to the spoon. I'd watch them devour it, their eyes glazed with satisfaction, unaware that the high-fat, high-sodium meals were fogging their minds, sapping their energy. "Mom, this is amazing," Lillian would say, licking her fingers. Ethan would nod, piling more onto his plate. I'd smile, pushing the serving dish closer. "Eat up," I'd say. "You both look like you need it." They didn't notice. The change. How they started napping in the afternoons. How their tempers grew shorter, their movements slower. I wasn't poisoning them, nothing so crude. I was just giving them what they wanted, in doses that would make them sluggish, vulnerable. It was my first brushstroke in a plan that was just beginning to take shape. Then came the fishing trip. Ethan brought it up one morning, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "Hey, Margaret, let's do something fun. How about a day on Lake Michigan? Just the three of us, fishing, relaxing." Lillian jumped in, her smile too bright. "It'll be like old times, Mom. You used to love the lake." I knew better. Lake Michigan was vast, its waters unpredictable, with stories every summer of boats capsizing, swimmers vanishing. They'd chosen the perfect place for an accident. But I nodded, my face soft, my heart steady. "Sounds wonderful," I said. Their quick glance at each other, a flicker of triumph, told me everything I needed to know. The night before the trip, I found their stash. Tucked in a drawer in Lillian's suitcase was a small vial of pills. Sedatives, the kind that could knock someone out cold. I didn't touch them, just memorized the label. My plan was already forming, and those pills were the key. The morning of the trip, we drove to the lake, the air thick with humidity. Lillian handed me a thermos of tea as we boarded the small rented boat. "Drink this, Mom," she said, her voice almost too sweet. "It's got electrolytes, good for the heat." I took it, raising it to my lips, letting the liquid touch my tongue, but not swallowing. I'd seen the faint powder residue on the rim, smelled the chemical tang. They were watching me, their smiles tight, waiting. I played along, slumping slightly, letting my eyes flutter as if the sedative was kicking in. Lillian's laugh was sharp, victorious. "She's out," she whispered to Ethan. He smirked, steering the boat farther from shore. "Sorry, Margaret, but that insurance money's calling." My heart pounded, but I stayed still, counting the seconds. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out 2 sandwiches I'd made, bacon and cheese, their favorite. "You two must be hungry," I said, my voice weak, as if I was fading. "Eat something." They grabbed the sandwiches, tearing into them, without a second thought. too eager to notice the faint tear in the wrappers, where I'd slipped the crushed sedatives from their own stash. Minutes later, their words slurred. Lillian's head drooped, her sandwich falling to the deck. Ethan tried to stand, his eyes wide with confusion, but his legs buckled. They collapsed, sprawled across the boat, the lake's waves rocking us gently. I stood up, brushing off my jacket, my pulse steady. "Trying to trap me?" I said softly, looking at their unconscious forms. "You're not as clever as you think." I untied the anchor, letting the boat drift toward the open water. The lake was cold, the current strong. If they didn't wake before nightfall, the waves would teach them a lesson I never could. I rowed the spare dinghy back to shore, the wind biting my face, but I felt lighter than I had in years. They'd underestimated me, thought I was just a tired old woman who'd roll over. But I was an artist, and this was my canvas. As I stepped onto the dock, I hummed to myself, already planning the next stroke. Lillian and Ethan thought they'd painted me out of their picture, but I was about to show them the real masterpiece. I stood on the shore of Lake Michigan, the wind whipping my hair as the boat carrying Lillian and Ethan drifted into the distance, their unconscious bodies slumped against the deck. I could have left them there, let the lake decide their fate, but I wasn't that cruel. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, my voice trembling with practiced panic. "Please, my daughter and her husband, they're out on the lake, and I haven't heard from them. I'm so worried." The operator promised to send a search team, and I hung up, my hands steady despite the chaos I'd just orchestrated. Lillian and Ethan thought they'd outsmarted me with their life insurance scheme and their plan to stage my death. They had no idea I'd turned their own trap against them. The Coast Guard found them hours later, soaked and disoriented, clinging to the boat as it bobbed in the choppy waters. They were rushed to a hospital in Chicago, pale and weak, their smug confidence washed away by the lake's cold embrace. I waited a day before visiting, preparing my final move. I'd spent weeks crafting this moment, and now it was time to unveil the truth. When I walked into their hospital room, Lillian was propped up in bed, her dark hair limp, her eyes dull. Ethan sat beside her, his usual swagger replaced by a scowl. "Mom," Lillian croaked, her voice hoarse. "Where were you? We almost died out there." I set a folder on the bedside table, my face calm, my heart racing with a strange mix of sorrow and resolve. "I was in the hospital too," I said, rolling up my sleeve to show a neatly wrapped bandage on my wrist. "Just a sprain, the doctors said. I don't know what happened out there, Lillian. I was so worried about you both." My voice was soft, almost tender, but my eyes were steel. Lillian frowned, confusion flickering across her face. Ethan leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Something's off. We passed out, both of us. That doesn't just happen." I raised an eyebrow, feigning hurt. "Are you saying I did something? Lillian, I've loved you like my own daughter. Why would I hurt you?" The words hung heavy in the air, and then I opened the folder, sliding it toward them. Inside was a stack of papers, a fake condo transfer agreement I'd let them believe was real, and a detailed invoice listing $180,000 in credit card charges, luxury purchases, vacations, dining, all in Lillian's name. "You spent a lot while you were living with me," I said, my voice even. "That's your debt to pay now." Lillian's face went white as she flipped through the pages. This isn't right," she stammered. "You gave us the condo. You said—" Ethan cut in, his voice rising. "You can't do this. We're family." I let out a soft laugh, cold and sharp, and leaned closer. "Family? You think you're my family?" I pulled another document from my bag, the one I'd been holding on to for this moment. "Lillian, you're not my daughter. You're the child of my cousin Sarah, who died when you were a baby. I promised to raise you, to love you like my own. And I did. I gave you everything, my home, my savings, my heart, and you gave me nothing but lies. The room went silent, the weight of my words crushing the air. Lillian's hands shook as she grabbed the document, a birth certificate listing Sarah as her mother, not me. Ethan's jaw dropped, his bravado crumbling. "No," Lillian whispered, her voice breaking. "You're lying. You have to be." I looked into her eyes, the same eyes I'd once thought held a piece of my soul, and shook my head. "I loved you more than I ever had to. I paid your debts, bought your cars, funded your wedding. I never had another child because I gave it all to you, and you plan to kill me for money." Ethan lunged forward, his face red. "We'll sue you. You can't—" I cut him off, tossing the fake condo agreement at him. "Read the fine print. It's not legally binding. The condo's still mine. Always was." Lillian sank back, tears streaming down her face. But I felt no pity. I'd cried enough for her. I stood, gathering my things. "Pay your debts and get out of my life," I said, my voice steady. "You're no longer welcome in my home." As I walked out, I heard Lillian's sobs, raw and broken, but I didn't look back. I'd learned the hard truth. Love doesn't always come back. No matter how much you give. I changed the locks on my condo, donated their belongings to a charity, and made sure Lillian's marketing firm got an anonymous tip about her shady expense reports. By the time she left the hospital, her job was gone, her reputation in tatters. They thought they'd painted me into a corner, but I'd rewritten the ending. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Walking away from that hospital room, leaving Lillian's sobs and Ethan's defeated silence behind, felt like shedding a skin I'd worn too long. I'd spent years believing I could love Lillian enough to make her see me, to make her care. But she wasn't my daughter, not by blood, as I'd revealed, and not by heart, as her betrayal proved. She and Ethan had schemed to take my life for a $2.5 million insurance payout, but I'd turned their plan against them, left them with nothing but debt and regret. My condo, my home, was mine again, and so was my life. At 55, I was ready to paint a new picture, one just for me. The day after the lake incident, I'd been driving back from the shore when I saw a man struggling by the water's edge, his boat tangled in reeds after a collision with a dock. I pulled over, helped him free it, and stayed until he was steady on his feet. His name was Thomas Reed, 58, a book publisher with kind eyes and a quiet laugh. "You're a lifesaver," he'd said, handing me his card. "Let me buy you coffee sometime." I tucked the card away, not thinking much of it then, but a week after I cut Lillian out of my life, Thomas called. "I meant that coffee," he said, his voice warm, "and I'd like to hear your story, if you're willing to share." We met at a small cafe near my condo, the kind with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh pastries. Thomas listened as I talked, not about Lillian, not yet, but about my years teaching art, the way a blank canvas could hold a whole world. He didn't push, didn't pry, just nodded, his presence steady like a warm hearth. He told me about his work, how he loved finding new voices, stories that mattered. "You should paint again," he said one day, his hand brushing mine. "You've got a story to tell, Margaret." His words cracked something open in me, a longing I'd buried under years of sacrifice. I started small. I joined a local painting class, my fingers trembling as I picked up a brush for the first time in years. The strokes came slowly, then faster, colors spilling onto the canvas like emotions I'd held back too long. I painted irises, their petals bold and delicate, and hung them in my condo, replacing the empty spaces Lillian had left. I tore down her old sketches, repainted the walls a soft blue, and planted a garden of irises and roses in the courtyard. My home stopped being a battleground and became a sanctuary again, every corner reflecting me, not her. Thomas was there through it all, never loud or demanding, just constant. We'd walk by Lake Michigan in the mornings, the water calmer now, its waves a reminder of what I'd survived. He'd bring me books from his publishing house, stories of resilience, and we'd read them together over tea. One evening I told him about Lillian, her betrayal, the truth about her being my cousin's daughter, the way I'd fought back. He listened, his hand resting on mine, and said, "You didn't just survive, Margaret. You rebuilt yourself." I realized then that he quietly made sure Lillian's marketing firm learned of her fraud, costing her the job she prized. He never took credit. But I knew. One night, we sat in my garden, the irises glowing under the moonlight, the air sweet with roses. Thomas took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "Margaret," he said softly, "have you ever thought about loving again?" I looked at him, his steady gaze, the way he saw me, not as a mother who'd lost, but as a woman with a future. My heart, bruised for so long, felt light. "Maybe I already am," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a smile curling my lips. I didn't know if my story would end like a fairy tale, but I knew this. At 55, I was finally living for me. The canvas was mine, and I was painting it with colors I'd forgotten I had.